Coming to you from the wacky left coast Pacific Northwest, this is Net News Network Headline News, brought to you by the Behind the Line podcast. National and world news that matters, the stories the MSM won't talk about, deciphering the truth through all the lies. For more, visit BehindTheLinePodcast.com.
Let me read something to you and tell me if any of this sounds familiar to you. The basis of successful guerrilla combat is offensive action combined with surprise. During periods of low visibility, the guerrilla attacks, tries to gain a momentary advantage of firepower, executes his mission to capture or destroy personnel and equipment, and leaves the scene of action as rapidly as possible. Normally, the guerrilla does not consistently operate in one area, but varies his operations so that no pattern is evident. If possible, he strikes 2 or 3 targets simultaneously to divide the enemy pursuit and reinforcement effort. These attacks are normally conducted during periods of low visibility and are directed against isolated outposts, weakly defended locations, or the moving enemy. Guerrilla operations wear down and inflict casualties upon the enemy, cause damage to supplies and facilities, and hinder and delay enemy operations. The success of guerrilla operations, even the fact that the guerrillas continue to exist, lowers enemy morale and prestige, disrupts the economy, politics, and industry of the enemy or enemy-occupied areas, and maintains the morale and will to resist of the native population. Because guerrilla operations are primarily directed against lines of communication, industrial facilities, and key installations, they impede or interdict the movement of men and material and seriously affect the enemy's capability to supply, control, and communicate with his combat forces. In addition, the enemy is compelled to divert manpower and equipment to combat guerrilla activities. Another characteristic of guerrilla combat operations is the employment of multiple attacks over a wide area by small units tailored to the individual mission. This is not piecemeal commitment of units against single targets, but a number of attacks directed against several targets or portions of the targeted system. Such action tends to deceive the enemy as to the actual location of guerrilla bases, causes him to overestimate guerrilla strength, and forces him to disperse his rear area security and counter guerrilla efforts. A target is critical. This is talking about target selection. A target is critical when its destruction or damage will exercise a significant influence upon the enemy's ability to conduct or support operations. Such targets as bridges, tunnels, ravines, and mountain passes are critical to lines of communication. Engines, tires, and POL stores are critical to transportation. Each target is considered in relationship to other elements of the target system. Railroad systems. Railroads present one of the most profitable and easily accessible target systems for attack by guerrilla forces. In general, open stretches of track, switches, repair facilities, and coal and water supplies provide unlimited opportunities for attack. On electrified railroads, power substations, plants, lines offer critical targets. Types of railway targets vary with the geographical area. Railroad tracks are easily attacked by guerrilla units because it is almost impossible to guard long stretches of track effectively. Lightly armed mobile guerrilla units can inflict heavy damage on tracks. Guerrilla attacks against rails have far-reaching effects on an enemy who relies heavily upon railroad traffic for military movement. Power systems. Power lines are vulnerable to attack much in the same manner as wire communications. Large transmission towers often require demolitions for destruction. Critical points in any power system are the transformer stations. If these stations are not accessible but to attacks by guerrilla units, long-range fire from small or large-caliber weapons may disrupt their operations. Power-producing plants and steam-generating plants may be too heavily guarded for raid operations. To disable them, UW forces should concentrate on cutting off the fuel supply. Water supply systems. The disruption of water lines supplying industries can often be profitably accomplished. Water supplies generally are conducted through underground pipelines and may be destroyed with explosive charges. Raids against reservoir facilities and purification plants are also feasible, but the possible effects upon the civilian population must be considered. Psychological operations in support of unconventional warfare. Unconventional warfare involves ideological, religious, political, and social factors which promote intense emotional partisanship. Resistance organizations tend to attract personnel who accept violent change as a means of social action. They are motivated by hope for change. But the fluid nature of resistance activity, the alternate periods of isolation and combat, the surreptitious life make resistance personnel particularly susceptible to propaganda effects. These are just a few excerpts from the U.S. Army Field Manual 31-21, Guerrilla Warfare and Special Forces Operations. And I would ask you, the things that you've seen going on, especially over the last 2 years now, all the factory fires, all the supply chain disruptions, all the cyber attacks, the train derailments, food disruption, power disruption, internet disruptions, air traffic disruptions, oil and gas facility fires, balloons, mass shootings, open borders. The media and fact checkers would have you believe that this stuff is all just normal. This happens every single year. But tell me when the last time was you saw this much of it being reported day after day. This stuff going on in our country is sabotage, whether that's by elements of our own government or some other country, I don't know. But there is too much of it, and it's too coincidental to say that it's accidental. You have a government administration that lies about everything. So, of course, they're not going to tell us if this is sabotage. They want us to believe that everything's just fine. We're in a proxy war with Russia, and I would argue with China. And I believe these attacks, and they are attacks in this country, it is sabotage. It is guerrilla in nature. From everything I just read from that manual, and you look at the things going on, all these events have the nature and characteristics of sabotage and guerrilla warfare actors. What can be done about it? Nothing. But you should be aware, and I think that these attacks will become more frequent and more serious in the near future. So this would be the time for you to prepare and be ready for the worst. Well, good old Lori Lightfoot, mayor of Chicago, has lost her bid for re-election as mayor. Lightfoot finished behind former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallas, who garnered 34% of the vote with 94% of the votes in, and Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, who gathered 20% of the vote. Lightfoot received 17% of the vote. Vallas and Johnson will meet in a runoff election on April 4th. Asked by a reporter after a concession speech if she was treated unfairly because of her race and gender, Lightfoot, who is gay, replied, "I'm a black woman in America, of course." Lightfoot was elected mayor in 2019, but became the first Chicago mayor in 40 years to lose a re-election bid. Crime in Chicago has risen 52% since 2022 and over 100% since 2021. Along with her poor management of crime in the city, her temperament has also been something of a political show. After news broke that the Supreme Court might overrule Roe v. Wade, Lightfoot wrote wrathfully, "To my friends in the LGBTQ plus community, the Supreme Court is coming for us next. This moment has to be a call to arms." In 2021, according to a lawsuit filed by a former Chicago Park District Deputy General Counsel who made a deal with an Italian-American group to allow a Christopher Columbus statue to be used in a parade, Lightfoot furiously told him, "My dick is bigger than yours and the Italians. I have the biggest dick in Chicago." That's your mayor, Chicago. Homicide rates under Lightfoot's tenure have skyrocketed to generational highs, while robberies, muggings, carjackings, and other property crimes have all seen a significant increase, according to the New York Times. After the defeat on social media, Lightfoot wrote, "Serving as your mayor has been the honor of a lifetime, and I am so grateful to all of you who have stood beside me these last 4 years. We've made significant progress building a safer, more equitable city," she added. "I thank each and every one of you for believing in me." This woman is obviously completely delusional, mentally ill. I mean, just look at her. I guess she can go back to whatever planet she came from now. Chicago has a long road ahead of it if it plans to try to dig itself out of the mess that it's in now. The U.S. is more than quadrupling the number of troops deployed to Taiwan, the island nation hotly contested by China, just as tensions with China are reaching new highs. U.S. officials said that between 100 and 200 troops are planned to deploy to Taiwan in coming months, after only about 30 were deployed there a year ago. The troops will serve to expand a secretive program, obviously not so secretive, that is training Taiwanese forces on U.S. weapons systems and military maneuvers with an eye toward defending against an attack from China, officials said. A contingent of Taiwanese forces is reportedly also being trained by the Michigan National Guard. They have trained at northern Michigan's Camp Grayling during annual exercises with multiple countries. People familiar with the training told the Journal. The World Health Organization is monitoring bird flu outbreaks with increased concern after the virus reportedly spread to 2 humans in Cambodia in recent days. The organization is also still recommends universal masking in crowded areas, despite recent scientific studies concluding masks have no impact on stopping the spread of respiratory illnesses. Dr. Sylvie Briand, the director of Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness and Prevention, recently told reporters from Reuters and other news outlets that the ongoing spread of the bird flu H5N1 is worrying due to rising cases in both birds and mammals. The WHO, which serves as the primary health agency for the United Nations, recently assessed that the risk posed by the bird flu remains low, but Briand shared concerns of a potentially worsening virus. The global H5N1 situation is worrying given the widespread of the virus in birds around the world and the increasing reports of cases in mammals, including humans. One of the people infected with bird flu in Cambodia was an 11-year-old girl who died after contracting the virus. Health authorities in the country tested 12 of her contacts, including her father, who also tested positive for the virus. The CDC continues to classify the risk as low. The CDC website notes fewer than 10 human cases of H5N1 have been reported around the world since December of 2021. And 2 of those now are in the last month. Is this going to be the next pandemic? The North Korean government has warned that joint U.S. and South Korean military drills in and around the Korean Peninsula may be considered a declaration of war if they continue. Kwang Jong-gun North Korea's designated envoy for U.S.-related affairs, said the U.S. deployment of strategic military assets on the Korean Peninsula and joint military drills with South Korea are considered hostile actions. Last week, the U.S. and South Korea conducted joint aerial drills and held a strategic tabletop exercise at the Pentagon, which was designed to rehearse its deterrence capabilities and response posture in light of North Korea's expanding nuclear weapons program. The U.S. is also set to begin joint drills with South Korea in the coming weeks, and the exercise could include a U.S. aircraft carrier, South Korea's Yonhap news agency reported. Kwang's comments came days after the U.S. and other members of the United Nations Security Council raised issue with recent North Korean ballistic missile tests. The U.S., Albania, Ecuador, France, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement on February 20th in condemnation of the recent North Korean missile tests. North Korea has a pattern of issuing threats ahead of joint U.S. and South Korean military drills. Senate Republicans have responded to the Biden administration's choice to adhere to this emerging World Health Organization treaty on how to respond to future pandemics. They're saying they want Senate approval before we agree to anything. Republican Senator Jim Risch and 14 other GOP senators introduced a resolution making it clear that any WHO treaty with legal force relating to pandemic response that creates significant international commitments must be approved by the Senate. The resolution reflects Republican worries that Biden will look to adopt treaty obligations without first asking the Senate, and that the treaty itself is being negotiated in a way that may benefit China at the expense of the United States. Risch said that the negotiating process is giving China far too much control over global pandemic rules, and when the WHO should instead be looking to hold China accountable for its role in spreading COVID. The Biden administration has so far declined to say whether it will present the final agreement as a treaty for the Senate to ratify or as a political agreement or some other form of deal that won't need Senate approval. An aide to Risch said that the executive branch over the last several years has shown a preference for labeling international agreements as something other than treaties in order to avoid the need for a Senate vote. That aide noted that the president has broad constitutional authority on how to view international agreements, which is why Senate Republicans fear it may never reach the Senate. The worst president in the history of this country continues to do things to undermine this country at every level. The Defense Department has urged military service members to stop using the U.S. flag in popular patriotic demonstrations that are nonetheless violations of the National Flag Code. A memo issued February 10th said it is no longer acceptable for troops to carry the U.S. flag horizontally, such as on the field at sporting events, or for the flag to land on the ground after flying behind a parachutist, Stars and Stripes reported. The memo bars uniformed troops from directly participating in the unfurling, holding, and/or carrying of giant horizontal U.S. flags. It also prohibits military jump teams from using their flag in their performances if it cannot be caught reliably and handled respectfully by ground personnel. In recent years, some sporting events have asked military members to hold large horizontal flags during events, and some military units have carried them in parades, DoD spokesperson Commander Nicole Schwegman said in a statement. While many, including service members, find these events moving and patriotic, according to the code, the flag should never touch the ground or be carried flat or horizontally. Title IV of the United States Flag Code, also known as the Flag Code, specifies that the flag should never be carried flat or horizontally, but always aloft and free. That section also states that the flag should never touch anything beneath it, such as the ground. Well, maybe they should just find a better way to display the flag during these sporting events instead of eliminating it from these sporting events. People want to feel patriotic. We shouldn't take that away from people. We need more of that right now. Just in case there's any question in your mind if the government cares about you, if government agencies like the FDA, CDC, EPA are looking out for you and your health when it comes to untested vaccines and chemical spills and fires and things of that nature. Here's a little story from Natural News about the EPA. A lawsuit filed late last year by a coalition of nonprofit groups accuses the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, of failing to abide by a congressional order from nearly 3 decades ago, calling on the agency to evaluate how agricultural pesticides affect human hormones. In 1996, Congress told the EPA that it had 3 years to fully implement the endocrine disruptor screening program, the purpose of which is to test all pesticides used in food production to evaluate their endocrine disrupting potential. But the EPA never followed through. As of the time of this filing, more than 25 years after the passage of the Food Quality Protection Act, the EPA has yet to implement the endocrine disruptor screening program it created, and further, has failed to even initiate endocrine testing for approximately 96% of registered pesticides, the lawsuit, which was filed back in December, states. Since endocrine disrupting chemicals block, mimic, or otherwise interfere with the proper functioning of hormones, Congress wanted the EPA to assess all of them in the interest of public safety. To this day, the EPA has stonewalled the mandate while colluding with big industry to cover up the truth. Since 2015, according to EPA Deputy Assistant Administrator for Pesticides Program Yahweh Jake Lee, the endocrine disruptor screening program has been dormant. This almost 2 decades after its inception. That same year, the EPA released its first batch of test results. Among the 52 pesticides screened for endocrine disrupting attributes, there are more than 1,300 pesticides currently registered by the EPA. 18 of the 52 initially tested were found to warrant additional testing, but that testing never occurred. This is the EPA's job. Why are they stonewalling Congress? Why are they refusing to do their job? How much money are they getting from these pesticide companies? This is just one example of so many failures of the government, so many lies, so much corruption. If you think for 1 second they're being honest about vaccines and this Ohio chemical spill and fire and a whole host of other things going on in this country, you are sadly mistaken. You are naive. When once a republic is corrupted, there is no possibility of remedying any of the growing evils but by removing the corruption and restoring its lost principles. Every other correction is either useless or a new evil. Thomas Jefferson.
Thank you for listening to the Behind the Line podcast. If you like this broadcast, please like and share it. Please follow us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, Truth Social, Telegram, Gab, Parler, and LinkedIn. You can find our podcast at BehindTheLinePodcast.com, NetNewsNetwork.net, and on Anchor, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and anywhere podcasts can be found. Thank you for your support.